Because of a bowl of spoiled rice, I served the foolish and dull-witted Song Chang'an for 7 years. I thought he would stay stupid forever, but unexpectedly, a chance fall into the water actually restored his mind. From then on, the Song family no longer thought me worthy. Song Chang'an looked at me with eyes almost like charity. You've taken care of me for 7 years. Even without credit, there is hard work. Although I won't marry you, I can still afford to give you the position of a concubine. Everyone thought I would obediently comply and continue to grovel for a living in the Song household. But I brought out a bowl of plain rice and placed it in front of Song Chang'an. Since we were bound by rice back then, it is only fitting we sever ties by rice now. Then I turned around and walked through the Kui family's gate without looking back. Either way, it is serving people. What difference does it make who I serve? Song Chang'an stared at the porcelain bowl before him, his brows tightly furrowed. What do you mean? When that old agreement was made, he hadn't yet regained his wits. He was just a foolish child. So naturally, he didn't understand the reasons behind it. But everyone else in the Song family knew it perfectly well. His mother, Madame Zhang, glanced awkwardly at the porcelain bowl, her tone softening somewhat. Mingyu, why must you do this? Why? I looked at her face, almost wanting to laugh. Just a month ago, she was still frowning with worry, privately holding my hand and urging me at length to make sure I took good care of Song Chang'an. But now, they've completely changed their faces. Worried frowns turned into smiling faces. Anxious hearts turned to joy, and even their reminders turned into mockery. Everyone in the manor was overjoyed that Song Chang'an had regained his senses. Yet not a single person remembered that Song Chang'an and I actually had a marriage agreement. That year I was only 10, following my father begging for food all the way to the capital. By chance, we passed by the side gate of the Song residence, and happened to see a kitchen maid carrying slop water outside. Though it was slop, white rice and meat scraps in it were enough to make our whole family's eyes go red with longing. Father pleaded pitifully with that kitchen maid for a long time before getting a bowl of white rice. The sweltering heat of July, that rice had been sitting for 3 days, already spoiled and sour. Yet I still drooled with desire. Just as I was about to put it in my mouth, someone stopped me. It was none other than Madame Zhao. As she stepped down from the carriage, she dabbed at the powder near her eyes with a handkerchief, while looking down at us kneeling and begging. In her eyes, besides pity, there was also mockery. It is just a bowl of spoiled rice. Is it really worth all this? Of course it was. Following my father begging all the way to the capital, corpses of the starved littered the road. Never mind selling sons and daughters, even exchanging children to eat was commonplace. What is more, before us was a bowl of free white rice. Even if it was spoiled, it was enough for our whole family to have a full meal. So without hesitation, I dropped to my knees. Madame is a noble person, naturally deserving to taste all the delicacies of land and sea. We are of lowly birth. A bowl of spoiled rice to fill our bellies is enough. Madame Zhao was amused by me, covering her mouth with a handkerchief and chuckling twice. My father's expression relaxed. He bowed twice, then grabbed the rice and stuffed it into my brother's mouth. But unexpectedly, I suddenly heard you, girl, are quite the clever one. Would you be willing to enter the manor to serve? Just like that, I entered the Song manor and became a rough work servant girl. Madame Zhao was shrewd, never giving even half a tael of silver. Being a rough work servant girl at the Zhao household was no easy matter. Setting aside how stingy Madame Zhao was with her servants, where 3 meals a day often left one hungry, just Song Chang'an alone was enough to exhaust one's mind. He had a high fever as a child that damaged his brain, leaving his mind not quite clear, yet he was spoiled into having the temper of a young master. Sometimes the food wasn't to his taste. Sometimes the toys weren't to his liking. Whenever things didn't go his way, he would either smash cups and bowls or shriek loudly. He wouldn't stop until he'd smashed the last piece of porcelain in the room and made such a racket that no one in the entire manor could have peace. The master had always disliked this foolish and dim-witted son of his, so he never spared Madame Zhao from blame for failing to raise the boy properly. When Madame Zhao took offense, she had nowhere to vent, so she poured it all out on the servants beneath her. Unsurprisingly, I was always among the maids punished to kneel each time, for no other reason than my lowly origins. Though I was bought in on Madame Zhao's own word, still just a rough servant girl, young in age. And unlike the household-born servants, I had no one to rely on, so I became everyone's target. Every time Song Chang'an threw a fit, I'd have to kneel for a whole day. After just over half a month of this back and forth, my knees had swollen up like steamed buns. Finally, one day, I realized this couldn't go on. Even if I stayed at the Song family as a maid just to get by. Once my legs were ruined from kneeling, whether I could eat or not wouldn't matter anymore. So, I started learning to figure out Song Chang'an's preferences. Whether it was his clothing, food, lodging, or travels, or his expressions and mannerisms. I observed each one carefully and pondered thoroughly, determined to understand Song Chang'an inside and out. The young master had a picky palate. He'd grown tired of all the finest delicacies, and with having to drink bitter medicine daily, his appetite was particularly poor. But I noticed he liked eating pine nut amber candy when taking his medicine, so I guessed he must have a sweet tooth. So, before he could pick up the plain porridge again and throw a tantrum, I snatched the bowl away at just the right moment. And when he opened his mouth to yell, I stuffed a piece of candy into it. The nanny serving dishes beside us was dumbstruck. And Song Chang'an, halfway through his fit of rage, suddenly tasted the sweetness and dazedly calmed down. A disaster was thus averted. Everyone was spared a punishment of kneeling, so no one questioned whether it was overstepping for a rough servant girl like me to serve in the inner chambers. In fact, the next day, the nanny who served dishes went to the main courtyard, and when she returned, she promoted me to the inner courtyard, a second-rank maidservant, with half a tael of silver, per month. This was a height I had never dared to dream of. But I also knew well that this was a binding I could never escape from. Now on, Song Chang'an's every word and deed, every joy and anger, would be tied to my life, death, honor, and disgrace. From then on, I served Song Chang'an with even more dedication. I memorized his eating habits and temperament one by one, and gradually came to understand the barometer of the secondary courtyard. Today the medicine is bitter, so walnut dew is needed to mask it. Tomorrow the weather is cold, so he'd want to stay cooped up in the courtyard playing shuanglu. Over time, he hardly needed to speak at all, just a glance in my direction, and I would know what he wanted to eat or do. When I was young, I had attended school for a few days, and could recognize a few characters. Even under the influence of my daily 3 ancient poems to lull him to sleep, he gradually developed some humanity. He rarely threw tantrums anymore, and even when he encountered the master while playing in the garden, he could cup his hands and perform a not-so-standard bow. The master was very pleased, and in an extremely rare occurrence, praised him for being sensible. That very night, the madam summoned me to her courtyard. She sat upright in her high seat, half a painted screen blocking her face, making it impossible to see her expression clearly. "Mingyu, are you willing to become the young master's bedchamber companion?" That year, I was 12 years old. Even though I was still an innocent child, having been immersed in this household for 2 years, how could I possibly not know what a bedchamber companion meant? My body trembled as I knelt prostrate on the ground. "This servant is of lowly birth. I fear I am not worthy of the young master," Madame Zhao clutched her handkerchief and nodded as well. "Your birth is indeed lowly, but if Chang'an hadn't fallen ill, I wouldn't have chosen you either. Never mind, never mind. If you can truly serve the young master wholeheartedly, birth or no birth won't matter." Her pair of phoenix eyes raked over my still flat chest. "You are just a bit young, But that doesn't matter either. Just think of it as a child bride with a betrothal being raised in the household. It'll be more proper and justified when you marry later, listening to Madame Zhao's self-absorbed scheming and arrangements. I knew in my heart there was no longer any room for negotiation. No matter how anxious I was, I could only kowtow and express my gratitude. As I turned to leave the main courtyard, Madame Zhao's soft laughter drifted faintly from behind the beaded curtain. Trading a bowl of spoiled rice for a marriage, no matter how you look at it. It seems like our Song family got the short end of the deal. From then on, I served Song Chang'an even more closely. From teaching him to read and learn etiquette, down to his 3 daily meals, everything was handled by me alone. Even when Song Chang'an occasionally drank too much medicinal soup and wet the bed at night, I was the one who washed his undergarments. I practically became his nanny, by his side all 12 hours of the day. Though I toiled day and night. Fortunately, there was some progress after all. Song Chang'an's condition gradually stabilized. Though he couldn't be like a normal person, things had become much calmer and smoother. Both the madam and the master were very pleased with me, and were preparing to have Song Chang'an and me go through the betrothal ceremony this summer solstice. But who would have thought that at the spring banquet, Song Chang'an accidentally fell into the water, and somehow, unexpectedly, regained his senses. 5 years later, Madame Zhao said those words to my face once again this marriage. In the end, our Song family still got the short end of the deal. It was at this moment that I completely understood. My engagement with Song Chang'an should end here. My thoughts flooded back like a tide. I steadied myself and bowed in greeting. Madam, 7 years ago, you bought me and gave me a meal to eat. This debt of a single meal I have spent 7 years repaying it. And that should be enough. Now that the young master has recovered, it is naturally due to the Song family's deep fortune, and also the merit of the master and madam's day and night prayers. Mingyue dare not take credit. I smiled gently, turning to look at Song Chang'an. Since the young master has now recovered, with the Song family's status, naturally you cannot marry me anymore. I understand all this. It is just what? Song Chang'an looked at me with furrowed brows. Since you know, you are unworthy of being the main wife, and you are unwilling to be a concubine, could it be you want to become a kept woman? A wife is less enticing than a concubine less than a secret affair, and what you can have less than what you can't. In the second master's courtyard, there was exactly such a woman who gave up the position of concubine, insisting on being a nameless, statusless kept woman. In a month of 30 days, he'd run outside the city 35 times. Each time she'd hook the second master until he couldn't stop himself, and he'd pamper her all the more. The entire inner quarters of the second branch had been thrown into chaos by this woman. Therefore, the moment Madame Zhao heard the words, "kept woman," she couldn't hold back anymore. She shouted angrily, "Our Song family has no room for such filthy trash." I glanced sideways at Song Chang'an, and he too met my eyes. In the 7 years of serving him, Song Chang'an had been bewildered, or angry, or happy. Never had he been this clear-headed. Only at this moment did I realize that after the years of lingering confusion in those eyes dissipated, what remained was such piercing coldness. Song Chang'an was still that same Song Chang'an. Handsome features, dressed in finery, but in his lowered eyelashes, something had ultimately changed. I shook my head. "Young master, madam, you are overthinking. I don't want to be a mistress kept outside. What I wanted to say just now is, even if young master cannot marry me, you still shouldn't humiliate me with the position of a concubine. Though I was born lowly, I still have some backbone. Now that young master has recovered, if madam still appreciates my small contributions, please give me my indenture contract and let me leave the mansion." Madame Zhao and Song Chang'an both froze in place. They probably didn't expect I was serious. In their eyes, what just happened was perhaps my playing hard to get. Just like that mistress of the second branch, nothing more than retreating to advance, a means to gain favor. But everyone forgot that in the 7 years I served Song Chang'an, I never once slacked off or played tricks. The marriage with Song Chang'an back then wasn't something I begged for either. Although the title of Young Madam of the Song Manor sounds glamorous, it has always been a restraint binding me, let alone the concubine position he is promising now. From beginning to end, I've only wanted one thing, and that is to live freely. So I knelt on the ground, my tone calm. As long as Madam gives me my indenture contract today, from then on severing all worldly ties, I will never cling to the Song family again. Madam Zhao agreed to my request. In less than half a quarter hour, she sent someone to fetch the indenture contract and gave it to me. That bowl of rice, Song Chang'an naturally didn't eat, though it hadn't gone bad. Plain rice was too bland. I had already spoiled his palate, so naturally he couldn't eat it. Coincidentally, when I was leaving the main courtyard with the indenture contract, I happened to run into a yellow-eared dog in the yard. Its round, bulging eyes bore some resemblance to the former Song Chang'an, so I simply fed the rice to it. After all, they're both surnamed Song. It is the same whoever eats it. This debt of a meal, I suppose I've now repaid. When I returned to my room to pack my things, Palan, who I'd always been close with, hurried over to persuade me. Back when the young master was a fool, you wanted to marry him. Now that the young master has recovered his wits, you want to leave. Yue, are you stupid? Or has the young master's foolishness rubbed off on you? I smiled, speaking so carelessly. Aren't you afraid Madam might overhear? The young master has just recovered. She is overjoyed right now. Where would she find the time to bother with small fry like us? Palin helped me pack my trunk while giving me sidelong glances. Mingyue, we've always been the closest of friends. Be honest with me today. Why are you so set against becoming a concubine? My hands paused while folding clothes, and I couldn't help but grow curious myself. Yes. What exactly was it for? Could it be for dignity? But back when I followed father, begging all the way to the capital, that flimsy dignity had already been trampled countless times. Or was it for love? Though I've served Song Chang'an for over 6 years. Throughout all those years, he was always slow-witted and naive. To him, I was merely a slightly more attentive maidservant. To me, he was merely a superior I needed to constantly please. So where would any affection come from? Thinking it over, I suppose it was probably because of that jar of amber pine nut candies. Song Chang'an had a treasured candy jar, filled to the brim with amber pine nut candies. Those candies were cloyingly sweet, and Madame Zhao repeatedly reminded me not to let him eat too many. But scarcity breeds value. The less he got to eat, the more Song Chang'an treasured that candy jar. Not only did he have to hide it well during the day, but even at night when sleeping, he'd place it by his pillow. The maidservants serving in the inner quarters all loved to tease him, asking him for candies, but he wouldn't give a single one. Yet on my birthday, he wrapped a full 10 pieces in a handkerchief and handed them to me. He had just taken his medicine, and his eyes looking at me were all misty. Chang'an won't eat, giving to Mingyue. Only later did I learn that for 5 whole days, he hadn't eaten any candy after taking his medicine, just to save up these 10 pieces. It was the height of minor heat, and the candies wrapped in the handkerchief had already melted beyond recognition. Yet, I only felt this was the best birthday gift I had ever received. Because in the Song household, as long as I could hold the weight of these 10 candies in Song Chang'an's heart, I could get by peacefully. But, unexpectedly, at the spring banquet half a year later, Song Chang'an gave the entire candy jar to the Wang family's young lady. It was the same situation, the same words. Even though Song Chang'an was foolish, I understood clearly that the Wang family's young lady held far more weight in his heart than I did. Back when he was simple-minded, only I could be matched with him. Now that he is clear-headed, Naturally, he could seek a marriage with the Wang family. Seeing that I didn't speak, a glimmer of hope rose in Pailan's heart. Although the young master is now unwilling to take you as his legal wife, I heard Madam is preparing to arrange a marriage with the Wang family for him. The Wang family's young lady is kind-hearted. You've met her before too. If you become a concubine, she surely won't be unable to tolerate you. Such an arrangement would already be the very best one could hope for, but I knew, if I truly debased myself like a groveling slave and entered Song Chang'an's inner courtyard, that jar of pine nut candy would press me into the mud, piece by piece, from then on, never to rise again for all eternity. Pailan, I am an unlucky person. The very best things have never fallen into my lap. Besides, I am stubborn by nature. Once I've tasted sweetness, I can no longer stomach bitterness. Pailan sighed, and didn't try to persuade me further. She just slipped the silver bracelet off her wrist, stuffed it into my bundle, and left without looking back. Early the next morning, I bid farewell to Madame Zhao, then took my travel permit and indenture contract and left through the mansion gates. When passing through the side gate, a flash of dark yellow flickered under the eaves. My heart skipped a beat, almost thinking it was Song Chang'an, but as bamboo shadows swept past, a short figure darted out. It was actually that dog. Honger, he stared with round eyes, happily wagging his tail. I waved at him from afar. Consider it my final farewell to Song Chang'an. After leaving the capital, I first went to the government office to cancel my slave registration. Then I went to Huishun Hall to get a prescription for dispelling cold. It was an ailment from keeping night watch regardless of the heat for these 7 years. Not a big problem, but it could be deadly during winter. After prescribing the medicine, the old doctor with a goatee carefully instructed, cold invading the body can be minor or serious. Minor means catching a chill. Serious means infertility. Miss, if you still want a healthy body, you should focus on taking care of yourself and avoid getting chilled in the future. I nodded in agreement, paid, and was about to leave. But who knew the inscription under the silver would be recognized by the shop assistant? Oh my, it is from the Song family. I heard young Master Song recovered from his illness recently, and is now no different from ordinary people. I didn't want to get tangled up with him, so I just brushed him off. Not really sure. The shop assistant, having gotten a cold response, just laughed awkwardly. Then Miss surely isn't someone from the Song family's inner court. If you worked in the inner court, you should know that there is a maidservant serving young Master Song, said to be excellent at taking care of him, and has even gotten engaged to young Master Song. If you ask me, young Master Song's recovery is all thanks to this young lady. I'd say among the noble family's sons in the capital, quite a few have fallen ill or met with misfortune. Take young Master Kui, for example. He developed a leg ailment at such a young age. If he also had such a caring person by his side, perhaps he would. Hey, miss, why are you leaving? I took my change and turned to leave without hesitation, afraid of getting entangled with the Song family again. After all, I had sworn that oath clearly that day, and it wouldn't be good to break my word. With the medicine prescription ready, I had originally planned to take the waterway back to Suzhou, but I was stopped at the alley entrance. Pardon my poor eyesight, but might you be Miss Mingyue? The speaker was a servant boy in a green robe, born with a smiling face that made it hard to refuse him. I slightly bowed. That is right, and you are young master. He smiled. I don't deserve to be called young master. I am Jiqi, a servant by the side of second young master, Kui Heng of the Kui family. I came specifically to find you today, because there is an important matter to discuss. Since entering the Song household, I had hardly come into contact with anyone besides Song Chang'an. So how would I know any young Master Kui? I asked suspiciously. What matter? Jiqi cupped his hands. Since you've asked, miss, I won't beat around the bush. Our young master injured his legs when he was young. Although he recovered later, the old injury has now relapsed. We couldn't find a suitable person to attend to him for the time being, and we heard that young Master Song has already recovered and released you from the household. I heard that Miss has served at the Song household for 7 years, without a single mistake. So Miss must be extremely kind and attentive. That is why I came to invite you. Me young master said, if Miss is willing to agree, the household will never treat you unfairly. Whatever monthly wage the Song household used to pay, we'll pay 3 times that. Would Miss be willing? I held the medicine package, pinching the little silver left in my bundle. In the end, I couldn't resist the temptation. I am willing. It is just that I have a condition. The Kui family's residence was situated in the most secluded Yuhua alley. Lake on the left, mountain on the right, gray bricks and dark tiles and indescribable tranquility and serenity. Jichi led me through several turns in the residence, and only after passing through the hanging flower gate did I finally see the second young master he had mentioned. In the month of June, the rain was so dense it became mist. That second young master, Kui, sat upright by the window, brewing tea over a stove. The rising steam curled upward, making his refined features look like a piece of warm, gentle jade. Are you Miss Mingyue? I curtsied in reply. Replying to young master, it is this servant. Ki Heng coughed lightly twice. As for why I invited Miss here today, I presume Jichi has already explained clearly. If Miss is willing regarding this matter, I will never treat you poorly. But if Miss is unwilling, I will never force you either. Back then, staying at the Song household was out of necessity, but whether to enter the Kui household now, that was my choice to make. I clutched my bundle, looking at the tall buildings and spacious courtyard before me. Feeling somewhat timid, Kui Heng noticed my hesitation and broke into a smile. If you have any other concerns, young lady, feel free to speak up. I thought about it, and finally couldn't help but ask, if I enter the Kui residence, must I sell myself into servitude? If I don't do my job well, will I be punished by kneeling? No need to sell yourself, and no need to kneel as punishment. Really? There is such a good deal. Kui Heng raised his eyes to look at me, his pale and gentle complexion like a thin layer of snow covering a red clay stove. Of course it is true. There is only me in the residence anyway, so you needn't worry about others mistreating you, young lady. Only then did I feel relieved. After thinking it over carefully, I realized this was truly a top-notch job. No need to sell myself, no kneeling punishment, and triple the monthly wages. Even if I searched with 10 lanterns, I wouldn't find such a good master again, so I hesitated no more and agreed on the spot. From then on, I became Kui Heng's personal maidservant. When I asked about Kui Heng's leg injury, Jichi was vague with his words, only saying he carelessly injured his leg falling from a horse in his youth. Although it healed later, it still left lingering ailments. On ordinary days, it was fine, but whenever rainy weather came, the pain became unbearable, even keeping him from sleeping at night. Although Jichi could also take care of him somewhat, he was a man after all, and couldn't be as attentive and thorough. The Kui family wasn't without having searched for personal maidservants before, but I heard none of them suited the second young master's liking, so the matter was simply dropped. It wasn't until they heard the news of young Master Song's recovery that they sent Jichi to find me. Who would have thought, by such coincidence, he actually stumbled upon me by sheer luck. If the masters weren't so picky, what maidservant would pass up a job paying 6 taels of silver? After hearing this, I felt troubled, thinking I had agreed way too readily. I originally thought Kui Heng would be a difficult master to serve, but it turned out that wasn't the case at all. On my first day of duty, I completely figured out his temperament and habits. He could talk properly, understood reason, knew to run home when it rained, and knew to change into lighter clothes when it got hot. Just based on these few points alone, he was already much better than Song Chang'an. More importantly, he was from the Qinghe Kui clan. Though from a branch family, he was still a son of a noble house, after all. They valued rules and propriety above all, which had raised him into someone gentle as jade. with the proper bearing of a gentleman. Whether I was serving him meals, or helping him change his outer robes, what I heard most was always, "Much obliged. Thank you. Pardon me." Perhaps because I'd been treated like an ant for too long. Suddenly being treated like a person made me somewhat uncomfortable, and I would always unconsciously refer to myself as this servant. But Gufeng said, "Since the Song family released your indenture contract, you are no longer a servant. Even though you are now in the Kui household, miss, you may well consider yourself an ordinary person." Actually, I've heard such words quite a few times before. When I was at the Song family, Master Song had said it, and Madame Zhao had said it too. Master Song said that since I was engaged to Song Chang'an, I could no longer call myself a slave. Otherwise, wouldn't that make the entire Song family lose face? So I replied, if Master feels that marrying a slave would shame the Song family, you could simply go to the government office and have my slave registration removed first. Master Song gave no definite answer, and left with a flick of his sleeves. Madame Zhao then said that although I was a maidservant, I had enjoyed all the glory of the Song family, and from now on I should always be grateful for the Song family's kindness. So I replied again. I heard a bolt of brocade arrived at the residence yesterday. Could this slave have it made into a dress? Madame Zhao fell silent and changed the subject. At that moment I understood that this couple, though appearing harmonious on the surface while disagreeing at heart, were always birds of a feather. Some words spoken grandly may not be acted upon honestly. Therefore, even though Gufeng was gentle and kind, I still hadn't fully believed his words. It wasn't until I kept night watch that I realized just how warm and kind Gufeng was. The daybed for night watch was laid with soft cushions, and tea was prepared on the small table beside it. Even seemingly worried that the person keeping watch would get a sore back, soft pillows for napping were prepared. When keeping night watch at the Song family, there was none of this. No soft daybed, no tea, and no soft pillows. Only cold, hard floor tiles, and a back that could never bend. Enduring bitter cold in winter, suffering scorching heat in summer. Never mind dozing off, even half a moment's lapse in attention would earn a harsh punishment. If I hadn't served at the Song residence before, I really wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. While steaming medicine for his knees, I couldn't help but ask, "Young master treats his servants so well. Aren't you afraid they'll take advantage of you?" Gufeng smiled slightly. "Then look at everyone in this courtyard. Has anyone ever taken advantage of me?" I was speechless. The sun and moon are called bright, because there is nothing they do not illuminate. The rivers and seas are called great, because there is nothing they do not contain. A person lives but one life, needing nothing more than clothes to cover the body, 2 bowls of food to fill the belly, and 3 cups of hot tea to ward off the cold. If I cannot even provide these, then I would be unworthy of the title. "Young master, you all address me by." The dim yellow candlelight flickered across Gufeng's face, illuminating only a pair of gentle, serene eyes. The moisture from the medicine bag was blown into my eyes by the wind. My eyes, dry as a dead well for years, unexpectedly welled up with tears for the first time. Days at the Kui household passed easily, and before I knew it, deep autumn had arrived. My box for storing monthly wages had grown considerably fuller, yet the second young master's leg ailment showed no improvement. In fact, when the first autumn rain fell, he was already in so much pain that he couldn't even get out of bed. After 3 consecutive days of medicinal steam baths, with still no sign of improvement, Chi grew anxious. He wanted to go to the main Kui residence to request an imperial physician, but was stopped by Gufeng. If those imperial physicians were truly useful, I wouldn't have been tormented by this bone-deep affliction until now. Gufeng refused to change physicians, and was unwilling to make a fuss about it. So his leg ailment grew worse day by day. Watching him grow weaker by the day, I couldn't help but feel some pity. After all, this wasn't like Song Chang'an's dim-wittedness. Even if it couldn't be cured, one could still live well. His illness, if things went badly, could cost him his life. I racked my brains until I finally came up with a solution. Back when I was at the Song household, Song Chang'an had climbed a rockery and broken his arm, and no famous physician the Song family invited could cure his hand tremors. Until they heard that on Shiwa Mountain, 50 li from the capital, there was a hot spring with healing and blood-dispersing effects. Madame Zhao then ordered me to take Song Chang'an there to stay for half a month, and later, Song Chang'an truly recovered. Thinking about it now, if we really went to Shiwa Mountain for healing, Kui Heng's leg ailment might not be completely cured, but perhaps it could be alleviated somewhat. With this in mind, I boldly spoke what was on my mind. I had thought Kui Heng wouldn't agree, but he accepted, readily. Shiwa Mountain, alright, then, let's go there once more. At that time, I was only rejoicing that my 6 taels of silver job was finally secured, and didn't have time to think carefully about that word, once more. It wasn't until we arrived at Shiwa Mountain that I learned Kui Heng had been here before. The second young master's leg ailment keeps recurring. He came here to recuperate 5 years ago as well. I just don't know if that spring has dried up by now. Of course it hadn't. After Song Chang'an's trembling hands were cured, Madame Zhao became convinced that the hot springs of Shiwa Mountain had miraculous effects. Whenever Song Chang'an had any major illness or minor ailment, Shiwa Mountain had a towering terrain. To soak in the hot springs, one had to travel to the mountainside to find the guest rooms and spring. Kui Heng suffered from a leg ailment and should have been carried in a sedan chair. But, unfortunately, it had rained that day, making the mountain paths muddy, so 3 trails were closed off. The remaining path wide enough for sedan chairs was also blocked. They said some noble lady had come here for treatment and accidentally soiled her skirt hem while riding the sedan chair, and was now changing clothes, with no telling when the path would reopen. With things as they were, if we wanted to go up the mountain, we could only climb the 1,000-stone steps before the mountain gate. It wasn't that I hadn't walked this path before. It is just that Kui Heng. He smiled magnanimously. Since we're borrowing the precious hot springs of this place, naturally we should pay respects to the mountain god. This journey now can be considered a show of sincerity. If that is the case, then so be it. The Kui family didn't have many servants, and some were needed to watch the carriage and carry the luggage. Jiqi was busy fetching a physician and didn't come along. The task of supporting Kui Heng naturally fell to me. It had just rained yesterday. The stone steps were slippery. Kui Heng had an injury on his right knee and could only move 1 step at a time, so most of his body weight had to lean on me. I held the umbrella with one hand while supporting Kui Heng with the other. The cold wind carried moisture as it blew against us, yet it couldn't disperse the flush of crimson on Kui Heng's cheeks. It wasn't from romantic feelings, but from shame. People came and went on the mountain, and several scrutinizing gazes fell upon Kui Heng. From top to bottom first came amazement, then surprise, and finally it turned into a sigh. Such a jade-like young master. How could he? The light in Kui Heng's eyes dimmed bit by bit. I knew he must have seen far too many gazes like these. And at this moment, no matter what comfort was offered, it would seem pale and hollow. So I held it in for a long while, and only managed to squeeze out one sentence. I wonder if the second young master has ever raised chickens. Kui Heng was stunned. I haven't. I held the umbrella with one hand, wrapped my other arm around his waist, and climbed the steps with all my strength. I raised them when I was young at home. Back then, Suzhou hadn't yet suffered the great drought. Poultry and livestock all had food to eat, so raising them didn't take much effort. Only feeding chickens was more troublesome. Kui Heng's interest was piqued. How was it troublesome? Among poultry, ducks and geese are sturdier when they hatch. Father said it would surely not survive. But looking at that chick already the size of a fist, I really couldn't bear to abandon it. So I prepared water and food every day, wishing I could use a wheat straw to feed it into its mouth. Father and mother both scolded me for being stupid. Everyone said that chicken would die, but under my careful care, The chicken lived. Qiheng pressed. It died. Qiheng froze, clearly not having expected that. I smiled. All the chickens died, including the ones without lame legs. Some were stewed into soup. Some were made into filling. Some were stir-fried into dishes in the end. They all died. What is Miss Mingyue trying to say? I shook my head, lifting my mud-stained skirt hem. I just wanted to ask. Does the second young master want chicken soup tonight? Kui Hung choked, then broke into a smile. Just then the rain stopped and the sky cleared, and we finished the last stone step. I folded the oiled paper umbrella and was about to help Kui Heng find a side room to rest, when someone stopped us. Young Master Kui turned toward the voice and saw a graceful figure. Kui Heng clasped his hands in return. Madam Song. The person was none other than the Wang family's daughter, Wang Chuyu. Her dark hair was pinned low, clearly styled in a married woman's bun. In my second month at the Kui residence, I had heard of this marriage. Her husband Song Chang'an had lost his wits in his youth, but now had suddenly regained them. Everyone in the capital knew about it. If it was said that Song Chang'an marrying her was marrying above his station before, then now it was a perfectly matched marriage of equals. No wonder, even after being married for months, she still had such a radiant complexion like a lotus reflecting spring. Wang Chuyu pinched her handkerchief, looking somewhat pleased with herself. My husband and I came here for healing on a whim, yet we happened to run into young Master Kui. I wonder if it is a coincidence. Her gaze shifted slightly, landing on me, or if someone did it deliberately. When I was at the Song household, Wang Chuyu had seen me. Back then, Song Chang'an was still simple-minded, and I was merely a nameless servant girl by his side with no official status. Now Song Chang'an had suddenly regained his wits, yet I had become a maidservant of the Kui family. I bowed in greeting. In reply to Madame Song, my young master's leg ailment has not yet healed. We heard that the hot springs of Shiwa Mountain have healing effects, so we rushed here. It was also on a whim, not planned in advance. Wang Chuyu held her silk handkerchief, her gaze sweeping over my mud-stained hem and damp shoulders, smiling subtly. What a sharp-tongued girl. No wonder you found another master so quickly right after leaving the Song household. Kui Heng coughed lightly twice. Mingyue is naturally clever. Otherwise, why would young Master Song have relied on her for 7 years? I Kui am also someone plagued by illness, having tasted all kinds of hardships. Now that young Master Song has recovered, to put it grandly, it is thanks to his ancestors' virtue. To put it plainly, it is due to Mingyue's care. Madam Song, wouldn't you agree? Wang Chuyu's smile froze. Just the 2 words, 7 years, were enough to plant a thorn in her heart. But, after all, she was a girl from a prestigious, noble family. In just a breath's time, in the moment it took to dab her handkerchief on her makeup, she had already put on another smiling face. Second young Master Kui is right. Troublesome servants are easy to dismiss, but loyal ones are hard to find. A good maidservant like Miss Mingyue, couldn't you search high and low with a lantern and still not find one? Sigh, in the end. It is just that I am useless. Among the maids purchased for the manor nowadays, not a single one can compare to Mingyue. They're either too greedy or have improper intentions. I've discussed with my mother-in-law that if we happen to run into Mingyue and she hasn't found a new master yet, we'd buy her back at a high price. That way, those people in my courtyard can learn what a loyal servant looks like. As for the monthly wages, naturally we wouldn't fuss over 3 or 5 taels, just consider it like hiring a cat. But young Master Kui, do you know what my mother-in-law said? Wang Chuyu covered her mouth and smiled mysteriously. Mother-in-law said that this girl Mingyu was born with a lowly fate. At her most destitute, she'd even fight over spoiled rice to eat. There is really no need to keep her in mind. If they become wealthy later, so be it. But if they fall on hard times, I am afraid the moment the master pours out a bowl of slop, her whole family would come wagging their tails. By the end of her words, Wang Chuyu was laughing so hard she couldn't straighten her back. the golden biao ornament in her hair swaying along. She looked at Kui Heng mockingly. I just wonder, how many bowls of slop did young Master Kui spend to buy such a loyal servant? The people around cast sidelong glances, and I hurriedly lowered my head, unable to speak any words in my defense. After all, that bowl of spoiled rice 7 years ago did save my life. Nor could I curse out any words of resentment. After all, I was just a commoner woman, without the means or the courage to stand against her. I never thought to refute Wang Chuyu's words, nor did I expect anyone to stand up for me. After all, for an ant like me, just staying alive was already hard enough. But Kui Heng spoke again. A gentleman should help others with sincerity. If one offers filth while holding grain, such conduct is worse than that of beasts. Does Madame Song think that when the Song family helped Ming Yue back then, were they giving grain or discarding filth? These words were too convoluted. I hadn't had much schooling, so I didn't understand. But Wang Chuyu was well versed in poetry and classics, and her face turned pale in an instant. But before she could stammer out anything coherent, Kui Heng gave another slight bow. The rain is getting heavier. It would be inconvenient for me to chat with Madam any longer. Amidst the rain falling like pearls, we turned and walked away without hesitation. Wang Chuyu was left standing alone in place, nearly slipping when she swung her sleeves. After nightfall, another messy rain fell outside. I had just lit the charcoal brazier when someone knocked on the door. It was Kui Heng. He had just taken his medicine, and even his clothes carried a faint medicinal fragrance. Is young master hungry? I'll go have someone prepare food right away. Kui Heng shook his head and walked in while holding onto the doorframe, across a small bean lamp. We stared at each other, also feeling a bit awkward. The night wind was biting, so I went ahead and closed the door before asking, "Does young master have something to say?" Only then did Kui Heng nod. "I do indeed have something to say to Miss Mingyue." Kui Heng was always very polite. At the Song family, when they were in a good mood, they'd call me Mingyue, and when in a bad mood, they'd call me that cheap freeloader girl. Only Kui Heng politely addressed me as Miss Mingyue. Before, this politeness seemed to me like proper propriety. But after Wang Chuyu said those words today, it became distance. A young master from a noble family, no matter how kind and polite, still needed to save face. And I, a maidservant bought not long ago, being exposed and humiliated like this today, was clearly a slap to the Kui family's face. Speaking up in front of Wang Chuyu was merely to save the Kui family's face. I am sure young master's leg injury will recover soon. Once this rain stops, I'll be leaving the Kui household. Kui Heng was startled. Leaving the Kui household? Is Miss Mingyue returning to her hometown? I nodded, then shook my head. Sold into slavery since childhood. Having grown to my current age, I suddenly felt somewhat lost. I didn't know where I came from, nor did I know where I was going. Seeing me lower my head in silence, Kui Heng seemed to understand. Is it because of what happened during the day? I thought about it. It seemed like yes, but also actually, what Wang Chuyu said today wasn't that harsh. When I first entered the Song household, I'd heard far worse things. It is just that I was still young then, naive, and my ears were equally shallow. It seemed like no matter how harsh the words were, they wouldn't truly sink into my heart. But now, having left the Song family and truly become an independent person, those words that were once insignificant now felt like knives piercing her heart. I didn't know how to refute it. It was like when I was young, when the family dog had puppies, and father casually gave away the little black puppy, because its coat wasn't pure and it wasn't liked. Even just barking occasionally became its original sin for being abandoned. So now, I don't dare to ask. I can only cover my ears, hide my emotions, and like the little Mingyue who just entered the Song household, speak pleasantries with a grin. I was born lowly and my manners are coarse. I was never fit to serve you, young master. That I've managed to get by in the Kui household until now is already thanks to young master's generosity. From now on, We'll go our separate ways. And Mingyue won't tarnish young master's good name anymore. I thought such slick and slippery words would make Gufeng back off, but upon hearing this, he only let out a soft sigh, and waited until the night breeze bent the candle flame before saying softly, "But none of that is your fault." I almost thought I had misheard. What? Gufeng turned his head and said word by word, "Being born lowly, behaving improperly, none of it is your fault. If they could choose, who wouldn't want to be a bright pearl rather than an ant? If they could choose, who wouldn't want to wear silk brocade rather than coarse hemp? So, what if you've eaten spoiled rice? So, what if you've emptied chamber pots, Miss Mingyu? In this world, flowers and grass, insects and fish, humans and beasts, they're all the same. There is no real difference between one life and another. So no matter who it is, a heart that strives to survive deserves respect. I am not afraid to tell you and have you laugh when I was desperately seeking treatment for my illness. I even tried folk remedies with sparrow droppings. But so what? Whether eating common grains or consuming the world's filth, I am still myself. Am I not? After Gufeng finished speaking, he glanced sideways at me. I had wanted to refute him, but when the words reached my lips, I just couldn't bring myself to say them. Just then, the roasted chestnuts in the charcoal brazier crackled with a pop, giving Gufeng a timely way out. If the young lady hasn't made up her mind yet. Fortunately, the autumn rain lingers on, so there is enough time to think it over for a few days. I mumbled a couple of sounds in agreement, and fled the room as if escaping. Perhaps the heavens saw that I didn't know how to decide, so they too indecisively let the rain fall for 3 more days. During these 3 days, except for steaming medicine and changing clothes, I always deliberately avoided Peiheng. I was afraid he would ask me, yet also afraid he wouldn't. This job was truly vexing to do. But Peiheng's expression remained as usual, and even on the 3rd night, he still gave out the monthly wages as normal. Taking someone's money makes one obligated. I remembered he had mentioned yesterday that he wanted to eat chestnut cakes, so I made some to bring to him. Peiheng's room wasn't far, just around a few corridors, so I didn't carry a lantern. But who knew, before I'd taken more than a few steps, I ran right into someone. The chestnut cakes scattered all over the ground. I raised my head with a hint of anger, only to meet a pair of familiar eyes. It was actually Song Chang'an. That day when I met Wang Chuyu, although I had somewhat anticipated running into Song Chang'an, I never imagined it would be under such circumstances. Song Chang'an was obviously startled too. Seeing it was me, he seemed to have forgotten how to speak. Ming Yue. I raised my hand and waved it in front of him in surprise and confusion. Just when I almost thought he had gone stupid again, Song Chang'an suddenly grabbed my hand. Ming Yue, it is really you. How come you are here? I didn't want to get entangled with him, so I just withdrew my hand and stepped back 2 paces. Young Master Song, please conduct yourself properly. Song Chang'an also realized he had lost his composure, and hurriedly straightened his expression, though the corners of his lips were still curved. Mingyue, did you know I was at Shiwa Mountain, so you came here specifically to find me? I looked up at him, somewhat baffled. Song Chang'an didn't get my reply. When he lowered his gaze, he spotted the large character Kui on the food box. You are working for the Kui family now. How come? You are working for the Kui family. Why can't I work for the Kui family? I was so angry I laughed instead. When I left the Song household, the madam had already released my indenture to me. Now no matter which household I work for, it should be my freedom. Shouldn't it? Young Master Song? Song Chang'an's gaze suddenly contracted, his eyes full of sorrow and panic, as if he had lost some precious treasure. But you clearly said you would only stay by my side alone. I raised my head, always feeling something was off. Because these words were something I had said back when Song Chang'an was still a simpleton. Since he had now recovered his senses, how could he remember things from when he was a simpleton? Perhaps the questioning in my eyes was too obvious, and Song Chang'an gave a bitter smile. You don't know. These past few months, I often recall things from before. Sometimes it is you accompanying me flying kites in the garden. Sometimes it is you keeping me company reciting poetry to me. But when the dream ended, the one by my side was Lady Wang. Sometimes I wonder if forcing you to be a concubine back then was wronging you. Fortunately, although you've sold yourself into servitude now, the Kui family and the Song family do have some ties. If I ask the Kui family for you, they'll surely agree. Mingye, come back with me, won't you? Go back. Go back to do what? Be that child bride who followed behind him every day, caring for his every need, or to be the kept mistress in his chambers who could never see the light of day. But I don't want either. I took 2 steps back, and there was a hint of disappointment in my gaze toward Song Chang'an. If you had abandoned me back then and never looked back, I might have respected you for having some resolve. But you were the one who kept saying you didn't want me to marry in as your wife. And you were the one who insisted my origins were lowly. Yet I asked for too much. Now you are asking me to go back with you. To go back and keep being that Li Minyue who anyone could bully. Hearing this, Song Chang'an's eyes reddened, unable to utter a single word. Of course I knew he wasn't sincerely admitting his wrongs after all. Not everyone in this world feels regret after losing something. The reason he wanted me to go back was simply because there was no one in the household he was used to. Or perhaps he couldn't get food that suited his taste. When it came down to it, in his eyes, I was nothing more than a handy wet nurse, a cook to his liking. But seeing him like this now, it would be a lie to say my heart felt nothing. After all, he was more or less raised by my own hands. Even if I devoted myself for profit back then, it is impossible that I didn't invest even a shred of feelings. Perhaps reminded of those 10 pine nut candies. My heart softened after all. I coaxed him gently with a few words. What is done now. No matter what, there is no going back. Now that you are married, you should live your life properly. As for capable servants, as long as you are willing to spend big money, you'll definitely find some. I won't get involved. I couldn't bother to pick up the chestnut cakes and turn to leave. Turning past the cornerstone of the corridor, a cold wind happened to brush by, making the lanterns under the eaves tremble lightly. I wonder if he actually took those words to heart or not. Probably provoked by Song Chang'an. I sat facing the candlelight all night, and then I figured things out. The next day I went to tell Kui Heng that I would continue staying by his side to serve. He smiled and asked me why, but I didn't answer. What else could it be for? Probably because the night duty couch was too soft, the monthly salary was too generous, or maybe the master I served was too kind-hearted. Of course, most importantly, it was because of fear. Afraid of not finding a good master, and also afraid of finding a bad one. Most importantly of all, afraid of encountering a master who didn't treat people as humans. In the 2nd month of recuperating at Shiwa Mountain, Kui Heng's leg injury had already mostly healed. The physician said that aside from the effects of the hot springs, it was also thanks to my daily massages for him. The remaining root of the illness wouldn't benefit much from hot springs anymore. One must go to a place with spring-like weather, year-round, to properly recuperate. Jiqi thought it over and over, flipping through every map of the 9 provinces, before finally finding Lingnan. Spring-like weather all year round, with abundant fruits, truly a wonderful place for recuperation. And so, the next day, we set off for Lingnan. By coincidence, we happened to encounter the Song family's boat that was out seeking a physician. That boatman was quite the blabbermouth, and in just a few words, he spilled every last bit of his master's private affairs. It turned out Song Chang'an's old illness had relapsed, and they were on this trip to find him a doctor and medicine, and while they were at it, to find a kind and virtuous maidservant to attend to him closely every day. After all, that young lady from the Wang family had already packed her things, and returned to her maiden home 2 days ago. When boarding the boat, Kui Heng glanced at me from the corner of his eye, as if afraid I would soften my heart again. But what he didn't know was that any kindness between Song Chang'an and me had long been severed with that bowl of plain rice. From now on, we would be strangers across mountains and rivers, and I would never spare him another glance. The boat owner was a warm-hearted woman. Upon hearing there was a sick person among us, she specially gave us a stove to brew medicine. Amidst the swaying ripples, the fragrance of medicine wafted gently. And Kui Heng finally answered the question I had asked when I first entered the Kui household. There are so many capable people in this world. Why must young Master Kui choose me? The reason I chose you is because 5 years ago, when I was recovering from injuries at Shiwa Mountain, a little girl told me that even if life can't be perfect, one must still push forward with all their might, and not just stretch out their neck waiting for death. She also said that if she weren't stretched too thin, she would definitely want to earn that monthly wage from me. So later, I sought her out to earn my monthly wage. Kui Heng smiled with an inscrutable expression. And amid the rippling waters, I too recalled some things from the past. 5 years ago, when I accompanied Song Chang'an to recuperate at Shiwa Mountain, I had indeed met a young gentleman, and seemed to have said those very words. But I never would have thought that person was actually Kui Heng. Perhaps this world really is that small. A promise casually made could quietly come true through all the twists and turns. Just as a gentle breeze softly blew, the slender willows swayed along with it. I lifted my head and looked up. Tomorrow would be bright and clear. Surely, it wouldn't rain again. In the 3rd year at Lingnan, Kui Heng finally got married. On his wedding night, he finally told his wedded wife about his past. They say listening to stories at night brings all sorts of wonderful flavors. I also have a story. Would you like to hear it? The bride nodded. Only then did he begin. Everyone says the Kui clan of Qinghe is infinitely wealthy and unmatched in noble refinement. But when I was young, I also went through a period of hard times. That year I was 8, when I was racing horses with my elder brother at the training grounds. He sliced through the reins with a single stroke of his sword, causing me to fall from my horse and break my leg. Mother summoned countless physicians, yet I still ended up with lingering ailments. Everyone said that of the twin dragons of the Kui family. From then on, only one could soar in the sky, while the other could only slither on the ground. Not even as good as a grass snake. During that time, Mother wept day after day. Father wallowed in regret day after day, and elder brother knelt by my bedside, begging for my forgiveness. Do you know what I was thinking then? The new bride thought for a moment before answering. Thinking of revenge. Kui Heng laughed in spite of himself and shook his head. At that time, I was only thinking Father clearly knew elder brother had done wrong, so why didn't he punish him? Mother clearly knew it was intentional, so why didn't she resent him? I was still young that year, and only thought my parents were playing favorites. It wasn't until I gradually grew older that I understood. It wasn't so. It was because after I injured my leg, elder brother became the only male in the Kui clan with any hope of going to war and joining the military. Struggles between noble families have always been like this. After figuring this out, I had thoughts of killing my brother. But later my leg ailment grew increasingly severe. Mother gradually lost patience with me, and Father also felt I had shamed the Kui family. When they were pressuring me through their words to set up a separate residence and live apart, elder brother appeared again. He arranged a residence for me, furnished it with servants, and even knelt on both knees in the inner hall to apologize to me. He said he was momentarily possessed by demons back then, and never meant to put me to death. Guess what was I thinking then? The bride answered again. Want to forgive? Kui Heng laughed again. This time, I truly wanted revenge. Unfortunately, heaven didn't give me the chance. Just 3 months later, he died on the battlefield in the northern frontier. Of the twin dragons of the Kui family, only the broken one remained. I thought I would feel relieved after my brother died, but I didn't. The lower my spirits sank, the worse my leg ailment became. At my worst, both my knees were festering, and I couldn't even stand. That is when I had thoughts of ending my life. But that day, I met a young girl. She saw me standing at the edge of a cliff, thought I was going to jump to my death, and lunged at me, pressing me down as we tumbled over several hillsides. At that moment, I so wanted to tell her I wasn't trying to jump off the cliff. I just wanted to feel the breeze before dying, but she wouldn't listen at all and nearly crushed me to death. Does my wife know what I was thinking at that moment? At the mention of this romantic past, the bride seemed a bit displeased, pouting. I suppose you were blaming that girl for ruining your plan? Gufeng laughed again. Of course not. The bride asked curiously. Then what were you thinking? I was thinking, how is this girl like a silver platter pressing down on me like this? Oh really now, you Kui Chingku, how dare you mock me? The bride pressed herself onto him, and amidst their playful tussle, it was as if they had recreated that scene from Shiwa Mountain years ago. Gufeng held his annoyed wife, soothing her gently. All right, this husband was being crude. But my guess wasn't wrong either. After all, that girl just happens to be named Mingyu. Outside, the moonlight was clear and bright, illuminating the couple nestled together. When the red candles burned out, and the silk skirt was shed, only then did Li Mingyue finally understand what that line in Kui Heng's book meant. I long ago turned my heart toward the bright moon. Fortunately, the bright moon shines upon the clear stream. So everything had been arranged long ago. Some affections in this world may arrive late, but they will eventually come.